Which brings me to a huge privilege to have Anne Dudley and John Lunn with us today for just like already my favorite chat, apart from all the other chats that were also my favorites as well. And so just to say hi first to Anne.
Hello.
Hello. And thanks so much for being here. Have you been Zooming and Skyping and video conferencing for the last few weeks?
Yes, with varied success results, I have to say. We've had a few sort of frozen moments and those sort of awkward moments where people are there and you can't hear them. And but you know, in general, we soldier on.
Oh, and John, the wonderful John Lunn. In a way, we were talking earlier about the fact that there's a kind of a reality to the fact that a lot of us sitting in rooms, whether it's our own studios or mixed studios, for long periods of time ourselves anyway. So somehow this is the same but different. Have you been still managing to communicate with people?
I've been in this room basically for the last 15 years without really getting out that much. So, you know, not a lot has changed, believe it or not. Although it's very weird.
Yeah, and I think in many ways the means of communication, we talked on the very first chat about the slightly having to recalibrate the way that we communicate, because we're all such social animals anyway, even those of us who work long hours. And so I had a really strong feeling this morning of really missing being in the studio, missing being around the players, missing just the kind of the social connection and the sort of the making of music with actual people together. And
it's a lack of anything to aim for. That's what's really kind of strange, because I mean, as everybody knows, it's a really high pressure job that we do, mainly because of deadlines. Yeah. All the deadlines have completely disappeared.
Yeah,
you know, with no real idea of when. I mean, it could be a couple of months, could be 6 months. You know, some of them could be a year away. You know, that we're normally going to be June. So it's kind of. It's quite hard to get motivated.
I think,
you know.
Funny enough, this very week, I did 2 remote sessions with musicians, which I'd never done before. And I hooked up with Andy Findon.
Oh, really? Fabulous flute player.
Yeah.
Lovely flute player. And with Peter Gregson, the cellist.
Oh, yeah.
Both of who's
been a previous chat guest.
Oh, has he? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Well, they're both sort of very well set up. They've both got their own studios. They both know exactly what they're doing. They're both excellent. And the results were good in the end. But I really missed being there, you know, within the room with them saying, well, can't you try that slightly different? Can you? Yeah. And you felt a bit sort of more awkward when you got back something. Because I wasn't actually present while they were doing the actual recordings. I sent the staff, they did it and they sent it back, and they were quite happy to then sort of redo things if I wanted to get them adjusted. But I felt a bit awkward saying, oh, could you do that because for some tiny reason, you know, because there's just a tiny bit too much vibrato, which if I'd have been in the room with them would have been fine, you know, the sort of thing that you say all the time. But and I think so the social thing I really missed on that aspect of recording, and I think I hadn't anticipated how important it is to sort of, well, of course we know how important it is, but it wasn't quite the same.
And I think that's actually a really interesting point, which kind of follows up, because we asked Peter specifically to give us his sort of top tips for remote recording, both as a player and also if you're going to if you were sending things to the composers. But I think we didn't actually quite cover that interaction, which I think we're all so used to doing in the studio, which is that you sit behind the desk and you go, just one more, just one more for me, just one more for safety, just one more. And,
exactly.
And
really, something will come up in that second time, which hadn't happened the first time, which you can build on. Yeah. And of course, that was what was missing. Yeah. Just one. Can you just do one more? I'm really guilty about it.
I'm not sure what it is you're looking for either. but there's a possibility that it might just happen in this take.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And that's very interesting. That actually leads me. We've had because obviously you two are so wonderful. We've had lots and lots of interesting questions coming through on various channels, and I'd been sort of thinking about which of the questions that people have asked would be sort of specifically interesting for you both, and actually one of the things that's come up is about collaboration with other artists, with singers, and obviously with your amazing sort of background through records, really, probably records first, maybe, and then through into film. It feels like collaboration and getting the most out of perhaps surprising things out of players has been something that for both of you. Maybe John, if I could come to you first. I mean,
well, in fact, the only thing I'm actually doing at the moment is that there's a new season of The Last Kingdom coming out on Netflix next Sunday, and last year we produced an album of it. I collaborate with this amazing singer Ivar Palsdottir, who lives in Copenhagen. She's actually from the Faroe Isles. Anyway, Sony have asked us, they want to kind of do another bit of promotion for the album, you know, to coincide with the Netflix show. So they asked me if we could do another couple of new tracks. Obviously, they won't be able to go on the vinyl, but we'll certainly be able to put them out digitally. So in fact, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just kind of getting a Pro Tools session together. I'll send it off to Ivar, who's in Copenhagen. She'll do her bits. What she does is she usually does like 5 or 6 takes. And although I'm, you know, but technically I'm not the boss, it's a collaboration. So it's a slightly different, you know, than asking somebody to do a session.
Yeah.
And then, so she's in Copenhagen, I'm in London. And also my assistant, Danny, who is in Islington, he'll also get the same Pro Tools session. And then my sound engineer, I don't know how, because I never mix my own music.
That was a question. Somebody wrote in and asked whether you did mix or whether you had mixed in the past.
No, I gave up. I discovered very early on that it was such a specialist subject that I've never mixed I haven't mixed my own music for 20-25 years. But all the gear is here, and he's going to have to talk me through it on the phone, and then I'm going to have to send him. He's going to test it out in his system, and then he's going to be complaining about my mix. So I'm going to be in a really funny position. But oddly enough, it's actually one thing we could do at the moment. You know, it's a question of, you know, listening to feedback. You know, the 4 of us kind of collaborating. It's actually quite interesting. And anyway, Ivar and I, because she's in Copenhagen and also she's a singer, she's on tour a lot. So we are quite often having to do it like this, either find her a studio to go into, you know, somewhere to just for a couple of hours to record. So
do you find that with the artists that you collaborate with, that you allow yourself to go in with a bit more of a blank sheet of paper and can respond to what you get back, or do you have a very controlled sense of what exactly you want?
No, I mean, in fact, the first thing I'm doing is actually really quite a rough sketch. You know, it's by no means, it's not, you know, a track I'd say, you know, I'd go out and say, could I get a flautist to come and play this line on this track? It's not like that at all. It's much, much rougher. Yeah. And in fact, the structure's not really worked out. I mean, Ivar is particularly brilliant at being able to kind of come up with something. And then I can immediately go, oh, of course, that's, you know, what's going to happen. So it is very much collaborative.
Yes, exactly. It's that. That's all the T's, all the available T's. And you've obviously had as you know, some spectacular collaborations over the years. Do you find that you have a different way of working if it's a record project to film? And is that because of your vision or just the time or the budget?
Well, like John, especially if you're working on a record and you want to work with another artist, give them space. You know, I would never go and dictate what somebody should do. You know, I would be very interested to see what they brought to it. But, you know, it's quite interesting, this collaboration and arranging business, because I'm actually working on a musical at the moment. I haven't written the music. I haven't written the songs for the musical, but it's a film version of a musical, and I'm writing the underscore, which I've done before, and it's very interesting. I find to have somebody else's songs to work with. So you've got somebody else's material, and I have complete free range in whether I want to use the melodies and the harmonies and whatever or not. And it's so, I find it sort of liberating, really, to have somebody else's material to pull about rather than your own. And I guess really I started as an arranger. I never really even thought about being a composer until I realized that, in a way, being a composer is being an arranger. It's just you come up with your own stuff. So being an arranger is always sort of what I sort of consider myself as, really, in a way.
Interesting. Is there something about the identity of a composer, sort of naming yourself as a composer, that feels awkward to you, or is it just sort of because it sounds like possibly that the idea of collaboration is so sort of built into the way that you think, that the word or the role composer sounds like it's got a kind of extra element of kind of being a dictator built into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would have never occurred to me. I mean, when I was very young, I knew I wanted to be a musician of some sort, and I had no idea what sort of musician that I would be, but there was never any question that that was what I was good at. But composers, when I was studying music, was sort of old, male, dead, usually. And the idea of calling oneself a composer was almost like showing off, really. I mean, how dare you? You know, J.S. Bach's a composer, Beethoven's a composer. You can't possibly be a composer. So, you know, it took a long time. I think it's a bit like when you get married, you know, because it feels weird referring to your husband, doesn't it? When you first get married, it feels like husband, and it takes a while for the term to sort of bed in, and it's sort of composer just seemed like something that like other people were composers. So it's just taken a while.
And John, I mean, I think it is really interesting, because obviously people would, if earlier on in their career, they'd look at established multi-garlanded composers like yourself and Anne, and kind of go, well, you know, if either of you find it difficult to identify yourself as composers, then, you know, what's it like for somebody who's 21 just coming out of college? Do you think there's something, though, that is about people who write music for film and TV and ballet and other applied forms that make us sort of into natural collaborators? Or do you think that which came first, really? Did we choose that medium because that's the way that we were?
I mean, I must admit, I did get into doing film music because I was in quite a lot of bands in the 80s, and I did find that I enjoyed the studio environment, I enjoyed the recording, but at the same time, I was also trying to be a contemporary classical composer as well, because I was writing things like a fine concerto for the London Sinfonietta and things like that. And the real reason, there's a couple of reasons why I never carried that on. One was financial. But certainly I had a couple of kids, and you know, I was getting $3,000 to write a violin concerto that could take 6 months. You know, it was kind of untenable, really. And also, I got a bit pissed off with the contemporary classical music world. As you're rightly saying, but the composer was seen as this kind of, you know, on this sort of pedestal thing. And then when I came to work with orchestras as a composer, even orchestras that I'd actually played in myself and knew the musicians, was this kind of antagonism towards the composer that I just didn't feel in the film world at all. It felt much more collaborative, and also I quite enjoyed actually being part of a team. Where a composer is in the classical world is very much out on a limb still, I think. Although, you know, I haven't really been part of it for 15-20 years, but no, I think that is an interesting part of it, that certainly the whole collaborative thing. And you know, I mean, there's lots of musicians I work with where I never write down a single note for them. You know, they come in and they play their, you know, what's the point of writing a guitar part? You know, I mean, point. You know, a good guitarist can work out what the guitar part should be much better than I can. Exactly. So you know, and I think that comes from not from the classical, you know, not from my university degree, but from working in bands like, you know, like Anne did.
I think it's fascinating. So that the many of the questions that have come in the last day or two, I think although both of you have done all kinds of different things, there's a fascination with TV themes. Obviously, I have a tiny bit of a dog in the fight with this one, but that sense of maybe whether it's Downton or Poldark or whatever, and there's been many more before those for both of you, is a couple of people have asked whether or not there's a specific place to start. I've noted down Rich de Whittaker and Darcy Lewis for you to try and encapsulate in 30 seconds, 40 seconds, sometimes a minute if you get lucky. How do either of you try and approach the theme tune problem, except with fear and trepidation? And if I can start with you first.
Fear and trepidation. the first the first hurdle you have to overcome. What can I tell you? With Jeeves and Wooster, right? Going back to Jeeves and Wooster, I collaborated with this wonderful producer called Brian Eastman, who used to produce a lot of TV programs. He did Poirot, for example, and he was very, very good with music. And I wrote lots and lots of tunes because he said, I want this sort of jazz tune. I want a jazz tune, something jazzy and vaguely 1920s-ish. And I wrote lots of tunes and I played on the piano. And he said, no, not quite, not quite, not quite. And then I came up with this idea where it's a sort of if you know the theme. And I really liked it. I don't know quite why I liked it, but I felt it was right. It had the right sort of perkiness, although it's actually in a minor key, which is a bit weird for a comedy, but there you go. And I played it to him and he said, oh no, I don't think that's right at all. And I said, oh, Brian, no, really, I think this is the right one.
It's a good one.
And he sort of, he gave it some more thought. He said, yes, I think you're right. I think this might work. And it's probably one of the only times I've been extremely assertive and said, oh, this is really the right one, Brian. And I remember we did quite a demo of it, a quite elaborate demo of it. And I went to play it to the guy who was going to do the animated opening title sequence. And you know what it's like at that stage when you sort of really think you've nailed it and you get quite keen about it. And you think, yeah, I've written a really good theme here. I went to play it to the animator and he was very, very dour, sat there, very serious, looked at it and said, yes, I think that'll work. Yes. And then he had one little request. He said, could you put in a little clarinet line, do you think? And
oh,
okay.
Hello.
And thinking, oh, And then he came up with this animated sequence, which is a masterpiece. It's absolutely brilliant. And I never tire of watching it. And it's actually all about the music. And sure enough, the little clarinet theme, the clarinet plays this little thing and it turns into a car. And it's just wonderful. And it just goes to show you that people's reactions, you can't always go by their sort of physical reactions, because he obviously was keen and he got it. But he wasn't about to sort of get over demonstrative about it.
But I think that's fascinating, though, in the sense of, because I think a lot of us will have had the experience of chipping away and writing version after version after version, and then kind of panning for gold, if you like, and you hope that you recognize when something does really capture the show. But it's difficult if then perhaps your producer or the execs, whoever, if they don't also recognize the gold at the same time, then you're sort of
maddening moments.
Yeah, definitely. John, I mean, there's some of them.
Well, I've never really had that problem, because I try and persuade. I said, listen, we don't do the titles first of all. Let me work my way through the episode. Maybe even the second episode. And get the music that's working for the show. Get it right. Everybody's happy with it. And usually, by and large, a title suddenly is screaming at you. What it should.
Fascinating.
And so, I mean, in the case of Downton, it was slightly different. It was actually the very first scene I wrote for it, although it was my third attempt at it. And there was no title sequence in the first episode of Downton. That didn't kick in until episode 2. But that music at the beginning, which was, with a train and a da-da-da-da-da-da, and then you end up with a, big shot at the house, and you get this sort of grand harmony. That sequence was working in 2 or 3 other places in the very first episode, and everybody loved it. And so I was asked to then do a 30-second version of that, which I did, and they put the pictures to the music, which is quite interesting, because if I'd been given those pictures, it starts off with a dog's bottom, for Christ's sake, and then somebody dusting a chandelier, and it
as do all the best shows.
The pictures don't actually tell you much about what you're about to see. The music's doing absolutely everything.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And if I'd been given those pictures, I'd have written something very different.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
And do you think that there's, because I'm loving hearing John telling those stories, particularly about sort of, and actually really it resonates with me that it's very rare, I think, to find the absolute heart of a show from day one, from 1M1. And you sort of kind of find it as you go on. And most of the series that I've been involved with, by the time we got to the end of series 1, you kind of go, oh, okay, now we know what it is.
Yeah, no, and that's why doing series 2 is actually quite interesting, because you've really got it under your belt.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people who don't do series 2 because they've kind of done it all. I find that really hard to understand, because you've cracked it.
Yeah.
Yes. Plain sailing.
Soon you've cracked it.
Yeah.
Plain sailing.
On Poldark, we, in the editing process, they didn't edit episode 1, series 1 first. They actually did episode 3. Episode 3 was the first one I worked on, for exactly that reason that you say, not just in the music, but in everything else, the pacing of the edit and lots of other things they're discovering as they go along.
Yeah, absolutely.
So starting, I mean, let's face it, the episode that gets the most attention is episode 1, series 1. And by that time, you'll be
it's usually the first 15 minutes as well.
Aspect of it, really.
Definitely. Now, I'm going to go on a bit about process now, because there's a sort of, I think it's probably born out of a bit of imposter syndrome for everyone, whether, you know, however long you've been doing this, and however, whether you think you've done any training, because a lot of people ask about what your processes are sort of practically, in terms of sort of is there a particular place that you start? You know, how do you go about writing? But I think sometimes that these questions are kind of I think when I get asked them, I always think it's a bit like kind of asking, I don't know, Picasso about his brushes. Really, it's sort of like that. In a way, it's very, very kind of, not saying that we're Picasso, but it takes a kind of practical step that I mean, I kind of feel that sometimes that I take that for granted now, and it's other things that are much more important rather than the practicalities of it. But Anna, I don't know what you feel about the sort of the method and the process of writing. Do you have any specific things that you do that are kind of like talismans for how you get started in the morning, say?
The short answer is no. If I'm working on a project like a series, I do try and work on it every day, and I do try and start at a regular time and end at a regular time, and get some progress done. Some days go better than others, but I don't sit around waiting for a muse to strike. And if I'm sort of stuck, I'm a pianist, really. I play the piano. So if I'm absolutely stuck and I'm having a bad day, I'll just sort of stop and get out some Bach preludes or Mozart sonatas and just play, you know, just to sort of get it all going again. I mean, obviously it's something that's got nothing to do with Bach or Mozart, but it just sort of makes me feel a bit better, really, I guess. Yes. And I find that I sort of think through my hands, really. I'm an improviser, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I'll improvise until I get something that I like.
Yeah. I used to have this when I first started out. I was an assistant to Michael Kamen, and he was many things, and a wonderfully charismatic, lovely fella, but he was an improviser too. And it was that sense of kind of discovery through playing, where he would just put the picture up, or rather one of us would magically make that happen for him, and then just play against it, because there is something very much about that kind of that natural interaction. It becomes a conversation, and it feels like you're accompanying somebody then. John,
I'm very, very similar to that. Yeah, I mean, I try and start about 8 or 8:30 in the morning, but basically, you know, I'm improvising to the picture all the time, and I never switch the dialogue off, and I very rarely try and compose away from the picture as well, because I end up writing something that's too complicated for it. It sounds great, and then you put it to the picture, and you think, oh Christ, no, that's not going to, you know. And yeah, sometimes I've freaked directors out by going, there's this process where the picture suddenly takes on a new meaning that it didn't have before.
Yeah.
And that's when I know I'm onto something.
Yeah,
and the director always goes, but how do you know, if that's the right one? It's just an instinct. Suddenly you can, and then all of a sudden you can't really imagine that scene without that music. And, you know, but it's really, it's by improvising, you know, really, is how I do it.
And
I might improvise, you know, if it's a 2-minute scene, I might improvise a rough guide all the way through. That's kind of emotional. It might be full of mistakes, you know, but it's got a sort of emotional journey to it, you know, that I can sort of build, and then I'll go back and, you know, and correct it and make it better. But a lot of it is about that first, you know, that instinct about feeling it. And, you know, and also, you know, if you're doing, you know, a very emotional scene, you're wanting people to cry, you know, you've got to, I'm afraid at some point you've got to get that yourself at some point, you know.
definitely.
You don't get it every time you're going through it, because there's obviously practical things you have to do. But at some point in the process, you've got to have gone, kind of, yourself really, and you can only really do that by getting. I can only do it by getting emotionally involved in playing to the picture itself.
Yes, I think in another era, I would have been one of those pianists who played with the silent movies. I would have loved that job.
Yeah, yes.
I was born 100 years late, but that would have been fun, wouldn't it?
I think it would be wonderful.
Neil Brand does it, doesn't he?
Of course, fantastic, Neil. And I think it sounds like there's something that both of you are kind of touching on, which is that the physical act of playing is something that kind of unblocks us all. If you're stuck in the weeds, maybe, and got either bogged down inside our heads, maybe it kind of gets us out into our bodies a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And we do get bogged down. And as John says, sometimes we write things which are too complicated because we've just got a bit too wrapped up in... a bit too composerly.
Yes, exactly. Back to that.
Well, I'm not going to get away with this simplicity here, but actually you probably are.
There's a truth to it.
You've got to, it's all about the drama, and it's all about understanding the emotion in it and interpreting it. And the loveliest thing a director can ever say to you is, your music's made my scene better. Because you can highlight something in that scene which wasn't maybe quite coming across, then you really have done your job.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm working with my assistant and he's done something and he's done something really well, I will. The ultimate accolade is I will say, "You've really made me listen to that dialogue."
I see.
That's a fundamental point.
Yes, scoring under dialogue is an interesting thing, and it's something that we all have to do. And you want to really get it right without being too busy. And your little melodic statements, if you can get them between the dialogue lines and give them time to speak. I mean, I say that I improvise, and then I might get something that I like, and then I might be playing it, 40, 50 times before I really hone it down in terms of timing and the way that it fits in with the dialogue and everything like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Now, I've got a slightly different question for you both now, and promise me you won't take it personally. So I had a question from a composer colleague who is. This is a conversation about mid-career development. So I'm not saying that the three of us here are sort of mid or somewhere over the hill, but there's a lot of advice and a lot of conversation and thought goes into how do you get your first break? How do you, when you're just out of college, what do you? And I think a lot of that advice is good and sort of and slightly self-evident to a certain extent, but there's definitely a point, and whether that's in a person's 30s or 40s or 50s doesn't really matter at what age it happens, when things start to change, and not always necessarily in a positive direction. And both of you have had significant success and major awards and things that are now sort of like behind, they're in the rear view mirror to a certain extent, but you're both incredibly busy and successful now. So I'm just wondering whether you'd got any thoughts about how you sustain either your interest or your relevance, or whether you even sort of actively think about it or just crack on with the job. John, can I come to you first?
I mean, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think even to this day, I'm still working with people I've worked with in the past. There's maybe only one job a year that comes in from people I've not, because music's quite a difficult thing to talk about. So if a director or a producer meets a composer and you can manage to build up a musical language that you can both understand, that's incredibly valuable, and they'll kind of work with you for, you know, for life basically.
Yeah.
You know, if you find that relationship. And so certainly in my mid I don't think I'm certainly no longer mid-career. I think that's fairly safe to say.
None of us went that measured to it.
Probably there's still some things, you know, in the horizon.
Yeah.
But maybe not that many. But I think that's you know, I established a very good relationship with Gareth Neame, who runs Carnival Films. You know, and I'm virtually I've actually been a composer in residence basically for them, you know, for the last 10 years. I've done quite a few other things, and you know, on top of that. But it's about establishing those relationships, really, you know.
And do you feel, John, in a way that the sort of, I mean, I know from my experience that there have been relationships that when they first established, we did perhaps a great first film together, or you know, one series of a show, and then for one reason or another, those relationships that the filmmakers themselves go off to do something different. And is there sort of, I mean, I've always felt there's an element of luck in which shows go and are amazing. Do you think it's just sort of, do you think you've had any control in trying to select good shows or things that, do you look to see what the future might be?
I mean, I remember being really disappointed about 16 or 17 years ago, because I used to do a lot more movies.
Right.
And then I went through this bizarre period where I was like everybody's second choice.
I was probably third on that list.
But somebody else got it, you know. And I went through it, and then I got offered Bleak House with the BBC, which is was like 16-part television series, and I hadn't really done, you know, that many things like that before, and that was a bit of an eye opener for me, really. And that, getting it into I actually really enjoyed working on a long running TV series, and it also coincided with the time when the British film industry was kind of losing its way a bit as well. And actually I found, so in fact I intentionally stopped looking for movies, but partly because we've all had this, you know, sometimes you never know when they're going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and by the time the film gets round to the music, they've spent all the music budget. So it was whereas TV seemed a bit more kind of organized. You know, it happened, and it still does. You know, it happens when they say it's going to happen, and you know, when you get the budget sorted out and stuff. And so that was a bit of a career change for me about 16 or 17 years ago, which was deliberately to, you know, I'd love to have done a film if they came in, but I really stopped chasing them.
Yeah. John, I think that's very sort of telling, and you've it from the outside, and it always feels, I'm sure, incredibly different from the inside than from the outside. It looks like there's been this sort of gravitational pull from records through into movies, then with sort of TV coming up through on the side. Do you actively seek projects, or do you sort of respond to the universe and whatever gets sent your way?
Well, it depends. I mean, I think I've been incredibly lucky, but you know, we all go through peaks and troughs. And I do remember, actually, my agent sent me sort of list of what was going on, as they do. And I noted that Poldark was being remade. And I had a vague memory of it from the 70s, because my mum and dad used to watch it. And I remember it was this sort of sweeping romantic thing. And I very rarely do this. I rang my agent and I said, I might be interested in this Poldark thing. Is it any good? And he said, I'll try and get you the script. And he sent me the first 3 scripts, and I read it all in an afternoon because it was so bloody good.
Yeah.
And I rang him up and I said, well, you've got to get me this job. It's going to be fantastic. It's brilliant. And he said, no, I think it's gone. I think somebody's doing it. I said, no, you know, I really, really would want to do this. I really can't you try a bit harder? Can't you get me a meeting? And so he got me a meeting, and I did so much research for this bloody meeting. You know, I knew all about bloody Britain in the 1780s and all about Cornish music. I know nothing about Cornish music, but it seemed to go all right, and eventually I got the job. But but you know, that's the sort of exception, really, because a lot of the time I do feel I've been blessed, really, and like John, I have done a few classical projects, but they've sort of come in rather more recently, and he's right, they pay absolutely no money and they take up an inordinate amount of time, but I find them quite stimulating. And it's nice to have something like that to work on, which again can sort of tide you through the periods when perhaps you're not doing as much as you want to do, or even you're sort of thinking, I want to be doing something different, you know, and it's creatively more challenging.
See, do you, and we were talking with David and Dan last week about the difference between being an artist and a composer, or the sort of the perception, particularly now when for a lot of the new Netflix type streaming shows, there's a definite trend over the last few years to choosing people who are recording artists first and foremost to do the scores rather than traditional composers. Do you have a take on, would you describe yourself as an artist in preference to composer, as we've talked about earlier, or do you have
I sort of would, really. And I mean, I'm very aware of the fact that the first break I got in this business was because I was in the art of noise.
Yeah.
Because directors used our music, because we were fundamentally an instrumental band, for commercials and film sequences. And so they came to us to quite often to write commercials and TV stuff and film. And had it not been for that, I'm not sure that I would have really sort of been able to make that transition. So I've never really, I mean, I think why am I not an artist?
Totally, exactly. You're definitely an artist. And John, there's a sense of sort of, I think kind of, because, or certainly I feel that a film or TV composer, when they've done a great job, has sort of immerse themselves in the story so much that what you see and what you hear is the story and not the ego of the necessarily of the composer. And consequently, when we move then from project to project, sometimes our own sort of musical voice isn't as distinctive. It's just we've done a bunch of really distinctive shows. I don't know whether that means that we're less likely to be regarded.
I mean, I probably wouldn't consider myself to be an artist in that I don't think I've got such a thing as a signature sound. And really I've spent the last 20 years doing, you know, some shows that are really different. I mean, you can't get more. I mean, at the moment, went from the Downton Abbey movie to Last Kingdom. I mean, Last Kingdom's all, you know, this modular stuff behind it. And Downton Abbey's all, you know, real strings. You couldn't really get two different things. So I've kind of approached it like that. And in fact, somebody did say, because of this bizarre period that we're going through just now, well, why don't you do some of your own stuff? And my problem at the age I am now is that I no longer know what that is, because I've done so many different things. You know, what is, you know, do I write stuff like Downton Abbey, or do I do stuff like The Last Kingdom? You know, how do you know, what is me?
Yeah.
Oh,
You're getting a beverage in the background. Look at this. Oh, it's a beer, a delicious beer. Oh, hello. That's easily my favorite bit of the entire thing. How wonderful. And that looks like a delicious beer as well. Oh, cheers to you, sir. My last question, while John has a good old slug of that beer, and I know exactly what I'm going to do as soon as this is finished as well, is just about film and TV and the differences between the two. We had quite a lot of people who were saying, is it different to write for film than it is for TV? And obviously you've both done lots of each of those, and in John's case you've had the experience of a TV show becoming a film in the case of Downton. Maybe John first, was it different? Is it a different thing when it's on the big screen first? Did you approach it any differently?
No, you're still doing the same thing. You're still weaving between the dialogue and trying to, tell the story, basically. I'd say the only main differences are, well, certainly with Downton, I did have a bigger budget, and I had a bit more time as well to kind of, to get it right. But, but the recording process was almost, identical. The way I worked with the director and producer was absolutely identical. It was very, very little difference.
And you had a bigger band, didn't you? Was that because you got the budget, or was it?
Just because we could. No, I mean, but we didn't actually change it. I mean, well, in the TV series, we used a large body of strings. I played the piano on it, and we had like a French horn and a cor anglais and a soprano sax and a vibraphone. We didn't really stray from that. We didn't suddenly go, didn't get loads of trumpets in. There was a trumpet in one cue, but we didn't have any tubas, brass, kind of virtually no woodwind. We didn't want to chuck the baby out with the bathwater. We just wanted to be sort of bigger and grander, but not actually destroy the vibe that we got from the TV series.
Totally. And do you? I sort of associate your film work with some sort of fantastically like American History X. There's kind of some amazing darkly textured movies, but then also sort of like comedy too. Do you approach them, film and TV, differently, other than the time and the money?
No, not really. It's the same process. But I have found, I think as we all find in films, there's rather more people involved.
There is that.
So you have to sort of tread the PR line a bit more carefully. And I mean, quite a lot of extra budget, good, but a lot of it goes on, very elaborate mock-ups of cues, which perhaps in TV stuff, when you're writing a load of stuff quite quickly, there just isn't the time to do. But fundamentally, it's the same job. You're going through the same process. You're trying to underline the same dramatic points. In many ways, in a TV series, you've got more time to do it. Because if you've got a multiple series, you've got themes which recur, and even the longest film's not going to be much more than 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So. A 10-part TV series gives you a lot more scope in a way.
I suppose there's also the branding thing in television. There isn't so much film. That title theme is more important in a TV series than it is in a movie, because it's going to be used more and more, for advertising. It's going to be the thing that people hear on a Sunday night. You think, oh my God, that's Downton Abbey starting. That, because that's, in some ways, there's a bit more pressure on TV series.
Yeah, I hear you. We're coming up with 5 minutes left before everybody has a delicious beer along with John, who's whetted everybody's appetite. So we've had a couple of hundred people joining us virtually on the chat on the side, and I know many of those people. We talked about kind of mid-career development and maybe kind of trying to maintain those relationships that could carry you through a longer period of time. Do you have any words of lockdown encouragement for some of the people on our chat, and maybe some of the people who are kind of felt that they were just about to get going and were just having some projects, maybe their first project started, that have all got stopped right now? And do you actively encourage people to sort of like to come forward into the industry, or is it sort of like go and do something that's going to make you happy instead?
Well, hopefully being in the industry will make you very happy.
Yeah.
It's the most wonderful thing, really, to get wonderful musicians to play your music. I mean, it's something that we never get over. Well, I don't anyway. You go into the studio with a load of dots and you come out with, 30 minutes of music which has been played so beautifully. And I think there's a lot of depression at the moment about this situation, but I really do fundamentally think that it will pass. All things will pass. And there won't be, why would there be any fundamental change to our industry? People want to make television. They want to make films. They want to be entertained. They want to have great music. And there's always room for great talent. So really, I don't think anybody should be discouraged. Take this time to do things that you always wanted to do, listen to Shostakovich's symphonies or something, go and be, go and write something incredible.
No, I know. I've been trying to listen to a Beethoven piano sonata every day.
Which recordings? Do you have a favourite pianist?
Well, I vary them, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I was going to have Barenboim and do them all, and then I thought, so I've been varying them. So, yeah. And then I'm really into this modular synthesis stuff behind me.
I thought that was just wallpaper, John. Is that not the wallpaper?
And so I'm trying to pick a module every day to learn how to actually use it properly, rather than stuff like. I think we're just in a hiatus. I think if you just have to look at it as as just a pause in your. I think things. Anne's correct. I think things will suddenly pick up exactly where they left off, and we'll all be buggered because we'll all be trying to do things at the same time, whereas we should have been doing them spread out over a year.
As you said before, we'll all be trying to get into Abbey Road and Air all at the same time, and studio time will be like gold dust.
Absolutely. No.
It's such a privilege and a pleasure to chat, and I think everybody would be incredibly grateful to you both for taking an hour out to come and tell us some stories. There's for everybody who's on the chat and interested in the mentoring scheme. If you didn't catch all the details that Harriet was giving us verbally, there will be more stuff coming out for you, including when exactly the mentor training scheme will be, childcare permitting at my end, and when everybody will be meeting their partners and mentors and mentees. So I'm just going to say thanks very much again to Anne. I'll get you just to wave goodbye to everybody. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's nice to have virtual company.
Absolutely. And to you, John, it's been lovely seeing the modular wallpaper and the delicious beer.
It's great.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. I feel bad. I really want a beer now. But thanks very much, everybody. There'll be another chat same time, next place, same time, same place, i.e. the spare room here. But also there's a Facebook group set up for this now. Hopefully you've already joined, but that is a place to continue the chat for everybody later on. So thanks very much. Hope everybody has a good week. Love to your friends and families. Hope everybody keeps really, really well. And this will be it. Thanks very much. Bye bye now.
Yeah, take care. Thanks,
Bye
everyone.
bye.